Ethan Miller stood at the edge of the ravine, his surveying equipment slipping from his grip as his boots lost traction on the crumbling earth. The fall wasn't long, maybe 15 feet, but long enough for his life to flash before his eyes in fragments. The divorce papers, the eviction notice, the trailer park where he'd been living for 8 months. When he hit the bottom, landing hard on his shoulder in a bed of rotting leaves, he wasn't thinking about the luxury resort project that had hired him. He was thinking about how much a broken arm would cost without insurance. But then he saw it. Through the dense wall of kudzu vines and 40 years of unchecked forest growth, something gleamed dully in the afternoon light filtering through the canopy. Metal. Lots of it. Ethan pushed himself up, wincing at the pain in his shoulder, and stumbled toward what he'd initially mistaken for a rock formation. It was a locomotive. Not just any locomotive, but a massive diesel engine, completely intact, sitting on tracks that official railway maps swore didn't exist. The thing was enormous, easily 60 feet long, swallowed almost entirely by vegetation. Rust had claimed much of the exterior, but the basic structure remained solid, as if the forest had decided to preserve rather than consume it. Ethan's first thought was practical, salvage value. His second thought was more troubling. Why wasn't this on any of the survey maps he'd been given? The resort developers had paid him $5,000, money he desperately needed, to map every structure, every old foundation, every piece of potential liability in this 400-acre parcel. A 40-ton locomotive definitely qualified as something worth mentioning. He approached slowly, his surveyor's instincts overriding his shock. The thing was positioned on what appeared to be a siding, a short section of track branching off from what must have been the main line decades ago. But the main line itself was gone, torn up years ago when the railway company went bankrupt. This spur had somehow been forgotten, hidden, or deliberately concealed. The locomotive's number was barely visible beneath the rust and vines. 404. Ethan circled the engine, documenting everything with his phone camera. Behind the locomotive were 3 freight cars, their coupling mechanisms still connected. The first car's door was sealed with rust and what looked like deliberate welding. Someone had wanted this cargo to stay put. It took him 20 minutes and a crowbar from his surveying kit to pry open a gap large enough to squeeze through. The smell that emerged was a mixture of stale air, oxidized metal, and something else. Something organic and long dead. Ethan covered his nose with his shirt and climbed inside. His flashlight beam cut through the darkness, illuminating wooden crates stacked floor to ceiling. Most were rotted, their contents spilled across the floor. Old railway equipment, tools, nothing particularly valuable. But at the far end of the car, protected from the weather by the intact roof, stood a row of military-style metal containers, each marked with a federal government crest and a date. August 1984. Ethan's hands shook as he opened the first container. Gold bars. Dozens of them, each stamped with official government seals. And beneath them, wrapped in oilcloth, bundles of bearer bonds, negotiable securities worth their face value to whoever held them. No questions asked. He stumbled backward, his mind reeling. This wasn't salvage. This was a crime scene. Or a tomb. Or both. Ethan had lived in Echo Creek his entire adult life. He knew the story everyone knew. 40 years ago, the Blue Ridge Dam project had been the biggest thing to ever happen to the region. Federal money, construction jobs, a promise of prosperity. A special railway shipment had been arranged to transport the construction funds, gold and bonds worth $20 million in 1984 currency. The train never arrived. Official reports said it had derailed on the Gloom River trestle, plunging into the gorge below, taking the money and the engineer with it. The engineer's name was Thomas Jenkins. They said he'd planned it, that he'd been having an affair, that he'd somehow rigged the derailment and escaped with his mistress and the fortune. Search teams never found the wreckage. The river had supposedly carried everything downstream into the reservoir. Jenkins's wife and young daughter were left behind in shame, branded as the family of a thief and a coward. But if the train was here, on a hidden spur miles from the Gloom River, then the official story was a lie. All of it. Ethan's phone buzzed in his pocket, making him jump. It was a text from the resort developer. Status update? Need your preliminary report by Friday. Friday was 3 days away. Ethan looked at the gold, then at his phone, then back at the gold. $5,000 for the survey was good money, but this was something else entirely. This was evidence. This was truth. This was dangerous. He took more photos, careful to document everything, then squeezed back out of the freight car. He needed to think. Needed to figure out who he could trust with this information. The sheriff? The FBI? A lawyer? It was then that he heard the sound of an engine approaching through the forest. Ethan's heart hammered against his ribs as the sound of the approaching vehicle grew louder. Not a car. Something heavier, with all-terrain tires crushing undergrowth. He scrambled up the embankment he'd fallen down, his injured shoulder screaming in protest, and ducked behind a thick stand of mountain laurel. A black SUV emerged from the tree line, following what must have been an old service road that Ethan hadn't noticed on his survey maps. The vehicle stopped about 30 yards from the locomotive, and two men climbed out. The first was older, late 60s maybe, wearing expensive outdoor gear that looked like it had never seen actual outdoor use. The second was younger, built like a former soldier, with the kind of cold, efficient movements that suggested violence was just another tool in his kit. Ethan recognized the older man immediately. Everyone in Echo Creek knew Arthur Vance. Colonel Vance, as people still called him, though his military service had ended decades ago. He'd been mayor twice, owned half the commercial real estate in town, and sat on the board of every bank, charity, and civic organization worth sitting on. His family had been in the region for 6 generations. When people in Echo Creek talked about old money, they were talking about the Vances. The surveyor found it? Vance's voice carried clearly through the afternoon air. The younger man, Mitch Davies, Vance's head of security, nodded. Trucks parked a mile back. Equipment's there, but no sign of him. Could have just been passing through, seen nothing. Could have. Vance walked slowly toward the locomotive, his expression unreadable. But you know what they say about assumptions, Mitch. Ethan's hand moved toward his phone, then stopped. No signal this deep in the valley. Even if he had one, what would he say? That Arthur Vance, pillar of the community, was somehow connected to a 40-year-old train robbery. Based on what? The fact that he'd driven out to look at an abandoned locomotive? But then Vance said something that turned Ethan's blood to ice. 40 years, the old man muttered, running his hand along the rusted hull of the locomotive. 40 years of watching this mountain, making sure nobody ever came this far up the valley. And now some broke surveyor stumbles into it by accident. Davies scanned the surrounding forest with professional thoroughness. Want me to handle it? Not yet. Not unless we have to. Vance turned away from the train. Find him first. Have a conversation. Most men can be reasoned with, especially men who are desperate for money. If he took pictures, we need his phone. If he told anyone, we need to know who. And if he can't be reasoned with, Vance didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. Ethan remained frozen until the SUV disappeared back down the service road, its engine noise fading into the distance. Only then did he allow himself to breathe. His hands were shaking so badly he could barely hold his phone. He couldn't go back to his truck. They'd be watching it. Couldn't go back to his trailer. They knew where he lived. Ethan looked at the photos on his phone. The gold, the bonds, the government seals. Evidence of a crime, yes, but evidence that would get him killed if Vance knew he had it. There was only one person in Echo Creek who might believe him, who might have reason to want the truth about that train. Only one person who'd spent her whole life carrying the shame of what everyone said her father had done. Sarah Jenkins. Ethan knew where Sarah lived because everyone in Echo Creek knew where everyone lived. She rented the bottom floor of a converted Victorian on Maple Street, the kind of grand old house that had seen better days and better families. Her car, a 15-year-old Honda Civic held together by duct tape and determination, was parked in the gravel driveway. It was past 9 p.m. when Ethan finally worked up the courage to knock. He'd spent 3 hours hiking through the woods to avoid the main roads, circling back to town through the old railway cut. His surveying vest was torn, his shoulder throbbed, and he was pretty sure he'd walked through poison ivy at least twice. The door opened a crack, stopped by a security chain. Sarah Jenkins? Who's asking? The voice was cautious, tired. My name is Ethan Miller. I'm a surveyor. I need to talk to you about your father. The silence that followed was loaded with decades of pain. Then, my father died 40 years ago. I don't know what you're selling, but I'm not buying. He didn't die in the Gloom River. Ethan held up his phone, showing her one of the photos through the crack in the door. Because the train never went over the trestle. I found it. Today. 3 miles up Prescott Valley. On a spur that doesn't exist on any map. And your father's locomotive number was 404, wasn't it? The chain rattled as Sarah unlatched it. She opened the door fully, and Ethan got his first clear look at her. Mid-30s. Dark hair pulled back in a practical ponytail. The kind of face that had learned to be skeptical about everything and everyone. She wore old jeans and a faded newspaper t-shirt. The Echo Creek Chronicle, he realized. So the rumors were true. She'd come back to town, working for the local paper after her career at a larger outlet had stalled. Inside. Now. She pulled him through the door and locked it behind them. "And you better not be some sick prankster, because I've had about 40 years worth of those." Her apartment was small, but meticulously organized. The walls were covered with newspaper clippings, photographs, maps, all relating to the train robbery and her father's disappearance. It was the workspace of someone who'd never stopped investigating, never stopped hoping for vindication. Ethan showed her everything on his phone. The locomotive, the freight cars, the gold, the bonds. With each photo, Sarah's expression shifted from skepticism to shock, to something that looked like grief mixed with vindication. "They said he stole it," she whispered. "They said he ran away with some woman, abandoned my mother and me, that he was a coward and a thief. My mother died believing that. I grew up with every kid in school knowing my father was the man who betrayed the whole town. He didn't steal anything." Ethan sat down across from her. "Someone else did. Someone who had the power to make a train disappear, to forge reports, to make everyone believe a lie for 40 years. Who? I don't have proof yet. But I saw Arthur Vance at the site today, talking like he'd been watching over that train for decades. And his security guy, Davies, was ready to handle me if I couldn't be reasoned with." Sarah stood up, pacing. Vance, of course. He was a state representative back then, wasn't he? Just starting his political career. She pulled down one of the clippings from her wall. "Here. Article from 1984. Representative Vance mourns loss of development funds. Promises to fight for region despite tragedy." He made a whole career out of being the victim of that robbery, while sitting on 20 million in gold and bonds. "So what do we do?" Sarah turned to face him. "Go to the sheriff?" Ethan shook his head. "Sheriff Holcomb plays golf with Vance every Sunday. Has for 20 years. We need federal authorities, FBI maybe. Someone outside Vance's sphere of influence. And we need more proof than photos. Photos can be dismissed as fakes, especially if Vance's lawyers get involved." Sarah thought for a moment. "We need to go back, tonight, before they can move anything or destroy it. Are you insane? Davies will be watching. Maybe, but maybe he's still looking for you, not expecting you to come back. And besides..." Sarah pulled open a drawer and removed something that made Ethan's stomach drop. A handgun. "I didn't spend the last 20 years investigating my father's murder unarmed." "Murder? What else would you call it? He didn't run away, Ethan. If that train is where you say it is, then someone killed him. Someone powerful enough to make his death look like theft. And I've been preparing for this conversation my whole life." They took Sarah's Honda, driving without headlights once they left the main highway. The moon was 3/4 full, providing just enough light to navigate the old service road that led to the hidden spur. Ethan's hands gripped the dashboard as branches scraped against the car's sides. "You're sure this is the right road?" "I used to explore these mountains as a kid," Sarah said, her voice tight with focus. "After my father disappeared, I spent years trying to find where the train actually went. I knew the official story didn't make sense. The Gloom River trestle wasn't even on his route. But I was just a kid with a bicycle and a compass. I never thought to look for hidden spurs." They parked a 1/4 mile from the site and approached on foot, using Ethan's surveying flashlight set to its dimmest setting. The forest was alive with night sounds, owls, distant coyotes, the rustle of small animals in the undergrowth. But as they got closer to the locomotive, those sounds faded, replaced by an unnatural silence that made the hair on Ethan's neck stand up. The train was exactly as he'd left it, a hulking shadow against the darker shadows of the forest. No sign of Vance or Davies, no vehicles, no lights. Just the locomotive and its secrets, waiting. "It's beautiful," Sarah whispered, and Ethan realized she was crying. "I mean, it's a rusted piece of junk, but it's beautiful because it's real. It's proof that everyone was wrong about him." They climbed into the first freight car, and Sarah ran her hands along the wooden crates, the government seals, the gold bars that had cost her father his life and her family their reputation. Ethan had brought a better camera this time, proper documentation equipment. But Sarah was more interested in the locomotive's cab. "The engineer's log," she said. "Every locomotive keeps one. If my father was forced to divert the train, he would have written about it. It's how engineers think. Document everything." They forced open the cab door, which had been sealed shut by rust and time. The interior was a time capsule. Dust thick as carpet, spider webs draping every surface, the smell of old leather and oxidized metal. The engineer's seat still had its cushion, now rotted through. The controls were frozen in their last positions. Sarah went straight for the control panel, pulling away debris and searching systematically. It took her 15 minutes to find what she was looking for. A metal box bolted to the underside of the panel, hidden from casual view. Inside was a leather-bound logbook, its pages yellow but intact. She opened it with trembling hands, flipping to the last entries. August 14th, 1984, 2:47 p.m. Received orders to divert to Prescott Spur. Orders came from dispatch, but voice was unfamiliar. Requesting confirmation. August 14th, 1984, 3:15 p.m. Confirmation received. Proceeding to Prescott Spur as ordered. Something feels wrong. The spur was supposed to be decommissioned. August 14th, 1984, 3:45 p.m. Men waiting at Spur, armed. Not railway personnel. One identified himself as working for the representative. Orders to stop engine and exit cab. I refused. They threatened to kill me if I didn't comply. Stalling for time. Writing this in case. The entry ended mid-sentence, the ink trailing off the page as if the pen had been knocked from his hand. Sarah's breath came in short, sharp gasps. He tried to fight them. He tried to protect the cargo. Sarah, we need to keep moving. Get as much evidence as we can and... There's another car. She looked up at him, her face pale in the flashlight beam. You said there were 3 freight cars. We've only checked 2. They climbed back out of the cab and approached the third car. This one's door wasn't welded shut like the first, but it was locked with a heavy padlock, newer than it should be. Someone had been maintaining it, checking on it. Ethan used his bolt cutters, part of his surveying kit, useful for getting through old fences, to snap the lock. The door slid open with a sound like a scream. The smell hit them first. Not the decay of 40 years, but something preserved, mummified by the dry interior of the sealed car. Ethan's flashlight beam swept across the interior and stopped on something that made his stomach heave. A skeleton in an engineer's uniform, handcuffed to an iron beam that ran along the car's wall. The uniform's name tag was still partially visible, T. Jenkins. Sarah made a sound that was half sob, half scream. She dropped to her knees, the gun falling from her hand, her whole body shaking. Oh God, Daddy, they left you here. They left you here like garbage. Ethan wanted to comfort her, but his attention was caught by something else in the car. A briefcase, chained to Thomas Jenkins's skeletal hand. He approached carefully, documenting everything with his camera, and opened the briefcase. Inside were documents, dozens of them. Contracts, transfer orders, correspondence, all bearing Arthur Vance's signature. Evidence of how a young state representative had orchestrated the theft of $20 million in federal funds, using his political connections to forge reports, bribe officials, and make a train disappear. And at the bottom of the briefcase, a letter in Thomas Jenkins's handwriting. To whoever finds this, I was ordered to divert this train by men working for State Representative Arthur Vance. When I refused to surrender the cargo, they locked me in this car and said I would die with what I tried to steal. I am not a thief. I am a husband and father, and I hope my family knows I love them. The truth is in these documents. Please make sure they see the light of day. Please tell my Sarah that I'm sorry I couldn't come home. Sarah was standing now, the gun back in her hand, but she wasn't pointing it at anything. She was just holding it, staring at her father's remains, tears streaming down her face. We'll get him out of here, Ethan said quietly. We'll make sure he gets a proper burial, and we'll make sure everyone knows what really happened. That's when they heard the vehicles approaching. Multiple engines, moving fast, converging on their position from 2 directions. They found us, Sarah said, her voice suddenly cold and controlled. Probably had motion sensors or cameras we didn't see. Davies would be thorough like that. What do we do? Sarah looked at the locomotive, then at the forest around them, calculating odds. We can't outrun them. Not in my car, not on foot. And if they catch us out there, she gestured at the dark woods. We need to stay with the evidence. Make this a public spectacle, not a quiet disappearance. How? You still have cell signal? Ethan checked his phone. 1 bar. Flickering. Barely. Then we make noise. We call everyone. FBI, state police, news stations, anyone who'll listen. We live stream this. We make it so messy and so public that Vance can't cover it up. She was right. The only way out was through, and through meant making sure they weren't the only ones who knew the truth. Ethan started making calls while Sarah began live streaming from her phone, narrating everything they'd found. The train, the gold, the evidence, her father's body. Her voice was steady, controlled, professional. The voice of a journalist who'd been waiting her whole life for this story. The vehicles arrived before they'd finished. SUVs, 3 of them, their headlights cutting through the darkness, trapping the locomotive in a harsh white glare. Doors opened, and men emerged. Davies, obviously, plus 4 others who looked like they'd been hired for exactly this kind of situation. And finally, moving more slowly, Arthur Vance himself. "Sarah!" Vance called out, his voice carrying the warm authority he'd cultivated over decades of public service. "Sarah Jenkins, I heard you'd come back to town. It's a shame we have to meet like this. You killed my father." Sarah's voice didn't shake. "You locked him in that freight car and let him die. Your father tried to steal $20 million. Vance approached slowly, his hands visible, non-threatening. He was going to ruin everything. The dam project, the jobs, the future of this entire region. I did what was necessary to protect that future. You stole it yourself, used it to build your fortune, your political career, all while pretending to be a victim." Vance smiled, and in that smile, Ethan saw the truth about power. It wasn't about being right, it was about being able to make your version of events stick. Who's going to believe you? A disgraced journalist with an obsession about her father, and a broke surveyor who probably has gambling debts. Against me? Against my reputation? Against 40 years of established truth? "The evidence will speak for itself," Ethan said. "Evidence can be destroyed. Accidents happen. Fires, especially in these dry summer months. Terrible tragedy. Old railway equipment, probably sparked by some homeless person's campfire. By the time the fire department gets up here, there won't be anything left but ashes." Davies and his men began unpacking equipment from one of the SUVs. Gas cans, accelerant, ignition devices. They were going to burn it all. The train, the evidence, the witnesses. "You're live streaming right now, aren't you?" Vance asked, not seeming particularly concerned. "Smart. But cell signals are unreliable up here. And even if some of it got through, it'll be your word against mine. Desperate people making desperate accusations." Sarah kept her phone camera pointed at him. "I've uploaded everything to 3 different cloud servers. The documents, the photos, the logbook, my father's letter. Even if you kill us, even if you burn everything here, it's already out there." For the first time, Vance's expression cracked. Just for a moment, but long enough for Ethan to see the calculation behind the philanthropist's mask. "Then I suppose we'll have to be more creative about our explanation. Perhaps you two broke in here, planning to stage a fake discovery. Perhaps you accidentally started a fire while trying to manufacture evidence. Perhaps you died heroes, trying to escape the blaze you created." Davies was already moving, gas can in hand, splashing accelerant along the base of the freight cars. The smell of gasoline cut through the night air, sharp and chemical. The other men formed a loose perimeter, making it clear that running wasn't an option. "How long did it take?" Sarah asked suddenly, her voice cutting through the sound of sloshing gasoline. "How long did my father last in that car before he died? Did he scream? Did he beg? Or did he just write his letters and wait for someone to find him?" Vance's face hardened. "I wouldn't know. I wasn't there when they locked him in. But you gave the order." "I gave orders to secure a valuable asset for the betterment of this community. What my subordinates did to accomplish that goal was their decision. He was a human being. He had a family. He had a daughter who spent 40 years wondering if her father loved her or if he'd abandoned her for money. And now you have your answer. He loved you enough to die for $20 million he could have just handed over." Vance gestured to Davies. "Light it. All of it. Locomotive, cars, everything." It was then that Ethan remembered something from his surveying training, something about old locomotives and their safety systems. The pneumatic brakes on these older models ran on compressed air stored in auxiliary reservoirs. Reservoirs that could hold pressure for decades if the system had been properly sealed. He leaned close to Sarah and whispered, "When I say run, get behind the locomotive. Engine side, not the freight cars. What are you—" "Trust me." Ethan grabbed his surveying toolkit and sprinted for the locomotive's undercarriage. Davies shouted something, and one of the other men started after him. But Ethan was already sliding underneath the massive engine, his flashlight beam finding what he needed. The brake line coupling, still intact, still sealed, probably still pressurized after 40 years of sitting idle. He pulled out his hydraulic punch, a tool designed for driving markers into rock and concrete, and positioned it against the coupling. The men were closing in, their boots visible in the periphery of his vision. Sarah was shouting something, but he couldn't make out the words. Ethan triggered the punch. The coupling ruptured with a sound like a cannon shot. 40 years of compressed air, superheated from decades in a sealed system, exploded outward in a massive, violent decompression. The force was exponentially greater than Ethan had anticipated. physics and pressure and time combining into something devastating. Davies, who'd been standing directly next to the locomotive, was hit by the blast wave and thrown backward 15 feet. The other men were knocked down by the shockwave. The ground itself seemed to shake, and a mushroom cloud of dust, rust, and debris erupted from beneath the locomotive, creating instant chaos. But the real effect was on the freight cars. The sudden pressure change caused the couplings, already weakened by decades of rust, to fail catastrophically. The first car lurched forward, its brakes disengaged, and began rolling down the slight grade of the spur. The second car followed, and then the third, the one containing Thomas Jenkins's body. Vance screamed for his men to stop the cars, but it was too late. The freight cars were moving, slowly at first, then faster, following the overgrown tracks down the valley. The gold-laden car hit a section where the track had washed out and derailed, tipping over with a groan of tortured metal, spilling gold bars across the forest floor like some kind of twisted treasure chest. In the chaos, dust choking the air, men shouting, vehicles trying to reposition their headlights. Ethan and Sarah ran. Not down the valley but up, scrambling over roots and rocks, putting distance and elevation between themselves and Vance's men. But Sarah stopped after 100 yards, breathing hard. "The locomotive," she panted. "We can't leave it. It's the only thing that proves the train was here, that proves the official story was wrong. They're going to burn it anyway. Not if we make sure there are witnesses first." Sarah pulled out her phone again. The live stream had cut out during the explosion, but she had signal now. 2 bars, maybe 3. She started dialing. "FBI tip line. I'm going to report an active crime scene, federal property theft, attempted murder. Then I'm calling the state police, then the fire department, then every news station in a 100-mile radius. That'll take too long. Vance will torch everything and disappear before anyone arrives." Sarah smiled grimly. "Then we stall him." They moved parallel to the valley floor, staying high on the ridge where they could see the locomotive but couldn't easily be reached. Down below, Davies and his men had recovered from the blast and were attempting to relight their accelerants. But the explosion had scattered their supplies and, more importantly, had drawn attention. Ethan could hear sirens in the distance. Not close, not yet, but coming. Sarah's calls had worked. Multiple agencies were responding, drawn by her description of federal property theft and attempted murder. The question was whether they'd arrive in time. Vance knew it too. His voice carried up the ridge, surprisingly calm. "Sarah, Ethan, be reasonable. We can work this out. I can make you both wealthy beyond your dreams. That gold is worth $100 million at today's prices. Enough for everyone." "He's panicking," Sarah whispered. "That's good. Panicked people make mistakes. He's also trying to buy time to either burn the evidence or move it." They watched as Davies organized his remaining men into teams. One working to tip the derailed freight car upright, another attempting to start a controlled burn of the locomotive itself, a third group setting up to provide security in case law enforcement arrived. The sirens were getting closer. Ethan could see flashing lights now, visible through gaps in the forest canopy. Multiple vehicles, converging from different directions. The cavalry was coming, but Vance still had maybe 15 minutes to destroy enough evidence to muddy the waters. "The radio," Sarah said suddenly. "The locomotive's old shortwave radio. If it still works, we could broadcast directly to those emergency vehicles. Tell them exactly what they're going to find. The radio's been dead for 40 years. But you're an engineer, sort of. Surveying equipment uses similar principles, right? Electromagnetic waves, amplification, broadcast frequencies." Ethan considered it. His surveying equipment did include a portable ground-penetrating radar unit and a radio frequency signal mapper, tools designed to detect buried utilities and map underground structures. Both used broadcasting principles that weren't entirely different from old shortwave systems. "It's insane," he said. "It's our only play." They worked their way back down the ridge, using the chaos below as cover. Davies's men were focused on the freight cars and the approaching sirens, not on the forest around them. Ethan and Sarah slipped into the locomotive's cab from the far side, the side away from Vance's vehicles. The shortwave radio was a vintage unit, probably 1970s era, built like a tank but coated in dust and corrosion. Ethan's hands moved quickly, assessing connections, checking power leads, looking for any signs of salvageable function. "The main power system is shot," he muttered. "But if I can bypass the internal power supply and feed it directly from my surveying equipment's battery pack." He started pulling wires, stripping insulation with his teeth when his wire cutters proved too slow. This is going to be the worst radio engineering anyone's ever seen. But maybe. Just maybe. Sarah kept watch at the cab window, her gun drawn, ready to fight if they were discovered. The sirens were very close now, maybe 5 minutes out. Ethan worked frantically, connecting his battery pack to the radio's power leads, jury-rigging an antenna from the locomotive's existing electrical system, praying that some ghost of functionality remained in the old transmitter. "Try it," he said finally. "Broadcast on emergency frequencies. They should be monitoring all of them." Sarah grabbed the radio microphone. It was covered in grime, but when she pressed the transmit button, a small indicator light flickered to life, weak but alive. "Emergency vehicles responding to Prescott Valley. This is Sarah Jenkins. I am at the location of Locomotive 404, reported missing in 1984. The train never went over the Gloom River trestle. It was diverted to a hidden spur and has been concealed here for 40 years. Arthur Vance, former state representative and current Echo Creek landowner, orchestrated the theft of $20 million in federal funds. My father, Thomas Jenkins, was murdered, and his body sealed in one of the freight cars. We have documented evidence, including the engineer's logbook and correspondence bearing Vance's signature. Vance and his security team are currently attempting to destroy evidence by fire. Our coordinates are..." She read off the GPS location from her phone. The transmission crackled and cut out. Ethan tweaked connections, and the signal stabilized enough for Sarah to repeat the message. Whether anyone actually heard it clearly was another question, but they were broadcasting, and that had to count for something. It counted for enough. Through the cab window, Ethan saw the first state police cruiser burst through the tree line, its spotlight sweeping across the locomotive. Then another vehicle, and another. State police, county sheriff, even a fire truck somehow navigating the rough service road. Vance stood in the harsh glare of all those headlights, and for the first time, he looked like what he was, a 76-year-old man who'd been caught. Davies and his men dropped their accelerant cans and raised their hands as uniformed officers swarmed the scene, guns drawn, commands barked in authoritative voices that cut through the chaos. Sarah and Ethan climbed down from the locomotive, their hands visible, moving slowly. A state trooper approached them, her weapon drawn but not pointed. "Sarah Jenkins? That's me, the broadcaster. We picked up your transmission. Patchy, but clear enough. The FBI's about 10 minutes behind us. They were already in the area on another case. We're going to need full statements from both of you, but first..." The trooper lowered her weapon and spoke into her radio. "Dispatch, confirm. We have located railway equipment matching description of Locomotive 404, reported missing in 1984. Requesting forensic teams, federal agents, and the coroner's office. We have what appears to be human remains." More vehicles arrived. FBI agents in dark SUVs, forensic technicians with their cameras and evidence kits, even a news helicopter drawn by the scanner traffic and the promise of a story too big to ignore. The forest was suddenly alive with artificial light and official activity, transforming the hidden spur from a tomb into a crime scene. Arthur Vance tried to maintain his dignity as FBI agents read him his rights. He demanded his lawyer, insisted this was all a misunderstanding, claimed he'd simply come to investigate suspicious activity on his property. But his voice lacked the conviction it had carried earlier, and when agents found the accelerants, the financial documents in his SUV, and the correspondence in Thomas Jenkins's briefcase, his protests grew weaker. Mitch Davies didn't bother protesting at all. He sat in the back of a state police cruiser, silent and professional even in defeat, the kind of man who'd been in tight situations before and knew when the game was over. Sarah stood near the third freight car, watching as coroner's office personnel carefully documented her father's remains. An FBI agent stood with her, taking notes while she explained the 40-year nightmare her family had endured. Ethan could see the tears on her face, illuminated by the portable work lights the forensic team had set up, but her voice remained steady, professional. She was a journalist again, telling the most important story of her life. An FBI agent approached Ethan, a woman in her 50s with the tired eyes of someone who'd seen every variation of human corruption and wasn't surprised by any of it anymore. "Mr. Miller, I'm Special Agent Reeves. You're the one who found all this?" "Fell into it, technically. Was surveying for a resort development. Lucky fall. Or unlucky, depending on how you look at it." She gestured at the locomotive, at the gold scattered across the forest floor, at the circus of law enforcement and media that had descended on what had been a secret place. "We've been looking for this money for 40 years. It's one of the biggest unsolved robberies in federal history. You just closed a case that most people assumed was closed wrong. What happens now?" "Now? Vance gets charged with theft of federal property, murder, conspiracy, probably a dozen other counts. His security team gets charged as accessories. The gold and bonds get recovered, though we'll be digging through these woods for weeks to find all of it. The locomotive gets preserved as evidence. And you? She smiled slightly. You get a substantial reward. Federal law provides for recovery rewards on stolen government property. 10% of recovered value is standard. You do the math on $100 million. $10 million. Ethan's mind went blank. It was the kind of money that erased problems, that made trailer parks and eviction notices and desperate survey jobs disappear into irrelevance. It was also the kind of money that would change him, fundamentally, if he wasn't careful. What about Sarah? She gets the closure she's been seeking. Legal exoneration of her father. His name cleared. His reputation restored. That's worth more than money to some people. Agent Reeves paused. Though between you and me, we're also going to make sure she gets compensated for the damage Vance's lies did to her family. There are federal programs for victims of crimes like this. She won't be poor. The news helicopter made another pass overhead, its spotlight sweeping across the scene. Tomorrow, this would be national news. The small-town corruption case that had lain hidden for 4 decades, finally exposed. Ethan wondered if Arthur Vance had seen the helicopter, if he understood that his carefully constructed reputation was being destroyed in real time, broadcast to millions. Sarah finished with the FBI agents and walked over to Ethan. Her eyes were red, but she was smiling. The first genuine smile he'd seen from her. "Thank you," she said simply. "For what?" "I just stumbled into a hole. For believing me. For not dismissing this as a crazy woman's obsession with her father's ghost. For risking your life to help me prove the truth." She looked at the locomotive, at the freight car where her father's body lay. He died protecting that cargo. Died doing his job, being honest, refusing to surrender to criminals. All these years, I thought maybe the official story was true, that maybe he had abandoned us. But he didn't. He fought them. And now everyone will know. "What will you do now?" Sarah laughed, a sound with edges of both grief and relief. "Write the story of the century. Get my career back. Maybe move out of Echo Creek, or maybe stay and watch every street and building named after Vance get renamed. I haven't decided yet." She paused. "What about you?" "Don't know. $10 million is... I can't even process that. Maybe pay off my debts, buy a real house, figure out what life looks like when you're not one mistake away from disaster. Or," Sarah said, "you could invest in something worthwhile. This area, for instance. The state's going to want to preserve this site. It's historically significant now. The locomotive, the spur, maybe even build a proper museum to tell the whole story. Wouldn't that require someone who understands surveying, land management, historical preservation?" Ethan looked at her, really looked at her, and saw what she was offering. Not just a business opportunity, but a partnership, a purpose, a way to turn a nightmare into something redemptive. "The Gold Train Museum," he said. "Documenting the Vance theft and the men who stopped it, and honoring the engineer who died protecting it." Sarah extended her hand. "Partners?" Ethan shook it. "Partners." 3 years later. The ribbon-cutting ceremony for the Prescott Valley Railway Heritage Museum drew dignitaries from across the state. The governor attended, along with FBI director, multiple senators, and journalists from national outlets. The museum had been built around Locomotive 404, which had been carefully restored, not to working condition, but to preservation status, allowing visitors to walk through the cab where Thomas Jenkins had made his final stand. The third freight car, the one where Jenkins's body had been found, had been converted into a memorial space. Photographs of Jenkins lined the walls, along with his logbook, protected under glass, the letter he'd written to his daughter, and a comprehensive timeline of the Vance theft and its eventual exposure. Sarah stood at the podium, looking out at the crowd of several hundred people. She wore a black dress, professional and respectful, her journalist's notebook in one hand. A prop, really, since she'd memorized every word of her speech. "My father died on August 14th, 1984, she began. But his death wasn't acknowledged for 40 years. Instead, he was branded a thief and a coward. His family was destroyed by lies told by powerful men who wanted to cover up their own crimes. Today, we don't just open a museum. We correct the historical record. We tell the truth that my father died trying to protect, and we honor the memory of a man who chose integrity over survival." The crowd applauded. In the front row, Ethan watched with a mixture of pride and reflection. The reward money had indeed been $10 million, which he'd split equally with Sarah despite her protests. His half had gone toward buying the entire 400-acre parcel from the resort developers, who were eager to distance themselves from the scandal, and funding the museum's construction. Sarah's half had funded the research and documentation work, as well as a foundation to help other families of unsolved crimes. The museum itself was beautiful. Modern architecture designed to complement rather than overwhelm the historical railway equipment. Interactive exhibits told the story of the 1984 dam project, the theft, the cover-up, and the eventual exposure. A special section documented Vance's trial. Guilty on all counts, sentenced to 20 years, suffered a stroke before sentencing, died in prison hospital 8 months later, and the broader investigation into regional corruption that his arrest had triggered. But the heart of the museum was Locomotive 404 itself. Visitors could walk through it, see the engineer's cab exactly as it had been, touch the controls that Thomas Jenkins had touched, stand where he'd made his final stand. The freight car where his body had been found was now a quiet, contemplative space, with benches for reflection and a wall of remembrance for other victims of corruption and greed. After the ceremony, after the dignitaries had left and the reporters had packed up their cameras, Ethan found Sarah standing alone in front of the locomotive. She was touching the metal hull gently, the way you'd touch something precious and fragile. "You okay?" "Yeah." She smiled, and this time it reached her eyes. "I was just thinking about how many times I explored these mountains as a kid, looking for the train everyone said was at the bottom of the Gloom River. I was so close so many times, but I never thought to look for hidden spurs. Never imagined it could be this simple and this complicated at the same time." "Would you have believed it if someone told you? Before you saw it yourself?" "No, probably not. That's the thing about the truth. It's often more implausible than the lies people tell." She turned to face him. "But we found it. We exposed it. And we made something good out of something terrible. My father would have liked that." Ethan looked at the locomotive. No longer rusted and vine-covered, but polished and preserved, its number clearly visible. 404. A train that everyone said didn't exist, carrying the truth about a crime that powerful men had spent 40 years hiding. "You know what I've been thinking?" Ethan said. "How many other trains are out there? How many other secrets are hidden in places we're told to ignore? How many other families are carrying shame for crimes they didn't commit, waiting for someone to stumble into the truth?" That's a depressing thought, or a hopeful one. Because if we found this, if we exposed this, then maybe others can do the same. Maybe the truth always finds a way, even if it takes 40 years. Sarah linked her arm through his as they walked out of the museum. The sun was setting over the mountains, casting long shadows across the valley where the hidden spur had lain forgotten for so long. Tomorrow, the museum would open to the public. Thousands of visitors would come, year after year, to see the train and learn the story and remember that even the most powerful lies can be defeated by ordinary people with courage and determination. But tonight, the place belonged to them. Two people who'd fallen into truth by accident and decided to fight for it on purpose. Two people who'd taken a nightmare and transformed it into a memorial, a warning, and a promise that some secrets can't stay buried forever. The Silent Express wasn't silent anymore. It had found its voice, and that voice was telling a story that would echo through history long after everyone involved had become dust themselves. The truth, like the locomotive, was built to last. The final display in the museum was a photo essay, updated quarterly, titled, "What Happened Next?" It documented the ripple effects of the case's exposure. 12 additional corruption cases in the region, all stemming from evidence uncovered during the Vance investigation. 4 other railway disappearances across the country reinvestigated, with 2 resulting in similar discoveries of hidden equipment and stolen cargo. A federal law, named after Thomas Jenkins, requiring enhanced auditing of interstate transportation of valuable government assets. Sarah Jenkins winning a Pulitzer Prize for her investigative series, The Train That Never Fell. Ethan Miller establishing a non-profit consulting service, helping families search for missing persons in remote areas. The complete restoration of the Jenkins family name, with scholarships established at 3 universities in Thomas Jenkins's memory. The last photograph showed Ethan and Sarah at the museum's groundbreaking ceremony, shovels in hand, mountains rising behind them. The caption read, "Sometimes the truth is buried so deep that only an accident can unearth it. But once exposed, it cannot be concealed again." Locomotive 404 was hidden for 40 years, but it could not stay hidden forever. Neither could the truth about the men who stole from the public and the man who died protecting it. This museum stands as proof that ordinary people, armed with courage and evidence, can defeat even the most powerful corruption. The Silent Express has found its voice. May it never be silenced again. If you like this story, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss on the next ones. Have a great day.